Welcome to the Brass and Woodwind Shop. This is the last video in the old Cornet restoration series. It has taken 2 months, but this Cornet is finally almost done. There are all the parts, and I'm going to put it together today. I'm going to start by putting the valves together. This valve is number 3, and usually valve guides are not numbered, but these ones are. That's number 1. And that's number 3, so this is the one. And these were these funny valve guides that have the little screw-on things. And this is the only time in 26 years of repairing instruments that I've ever seen this type of valve guide. So you put it in there, then you have to thread the, well, if you can get in it, then you have to thread the insert into place. Then goes the spring. The valve stem. These valve stems are also numbered. This one's number 3, so that's the correct one. One thing I like to do when I put the valve stems in is put a little bit of slide grease on them. And what that does is it keeps them from getting stuck in the future. I'm going to wait to put the top valve cap and the finger button on until I get the felts put on there. Now the next valve. Now I'm going to put on the corks and the felts on the valves, and it is important to get the right thickness because when you push the valve down you want the ports to line up, and then when it goes up you also need it to line up. So you need the right thickness both on the valve stem and underneath the finger button. On a lot of newer trumpets and cornets the felts go on top of the upper valve cap, but on this one they go in the finger button. Also on a lot of older instruments they get a cork and then a felt. I do not know what thickness of corks and felts go on here, so I'm going to start with a medium-sized cork and then put a thin felt on top of that. Then the upper valve cap, and I'm going to put on a thin felt and a thin cork, and that's what I'm guessing fits on here. I'm going to measure it in just a minute. If it's correct, then I will leave it, and if it needs to be changed, I'll make it either thinner or thicker. Put the valve in, and then find the slots, and screw that down. And to check the downstroke is easy. You look in the ports on the second valve. I always start with the second valve when I do this because it's easy to look in the ports and see if that lines up. If you look in these two tubes as I push the valve down, you can see that it does not go down all the way. So I know that the felt right there is too thick. Actually, I'm going to pull out the cork and see if that's the right size. I pulled out the cork, and that looks like the right size, so that is good. So I'm going to do that to the rest of the valves. Now I need to check the upstroke to check the corks and the felts inside of the casing. To do that I have a tiny little mirror that's put in there at an angle, and you put that into one of the other casings, and then you look through one of the ports right here to see how it lines up inside of there. To do that I need to hold it up to a light and make sure that the light shines through the casing. So I'm going to put the little mirror in there and then find where the port is. Okay, then I'll push the valve down and let it go and see how it lines up. This is a little too thick. It does not go up far enough. So I'm going to take the, well, I'll probably put a thinner cork in there and then see how it is. So there's a thinner cork and the felt. Put that back together and see what we have. Okay, I see the valve in there, and it looks like it lines up and it does not go too far, so I think that is good. Now I will do that on the other valves. On some of the really old instruments, you cannot necessarily trust that all the corks and felts will have to be the same thickness because sometimes the valves open up too far or not far enough. But on this one, the parts look like they're in good shape, so I'm pretty sure that it will be okay on this one. I also put a little bit of slide grease on the upper and lower valve caps too when I put those on, and that keeps them from getting stuck in the future. It won't help right away because they won't get stuck right away, but sometime down the road they probably will get stuck, so this helps it out. Now I'm going to put on the water keys, and there are 4 ways to put on a water key spring, and only one way is correct. So that's how that goes on there. And I'm going to squeeze that together a little bit. There we go. Now I'm going to install the water keys. I have a little film canister that I keep some liquid shellac in, and I take just a tiny little dab of that and put that on the cork. And I also look to see if there's a bad side. Sometimes one side has a hole in it or something, and I put the glue on the bad side so that the good side is the one that's being used. And put that in there. Sometimes water keys are hard to install because you need to hold on to the spring, and if you let go even for the shortest period of time, the spring will spring open. But in this case it's going to be easy. Look at that. It just goes right in there. And then screw the screw in. And make sure it works when you're done. Sometimes if you screw the screw too tight, it can clamp that together so that it doesn't work. Then there's one more thing to do, and that's make sure that the cork does not leak. And what I do is put the pad slick. It's actually usually used for woodwind pads, but it works for this too. Put it over the water key and then level that so that it sits on there correctly. You can also test it by covering up one hole and then blowing on the mouthpiece. And that one is good. Then the other one you do the same way. Put some oil on the hinge rod, put on the spring the correct way, and put that in there like that. Put in the hinge rod and screw in the hinge rod. And then make sure that the water key cork is level. And test it. Okay, this one does have a leak on it, so I'm going to need to move that back a little bit. Okay, that one is good. Now it's time to install the slides, and most people know how to install slides, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But just put a thin layer of slide grease on there, and put the slide in. Let's see, yes, this goes in this way. You have to make sure you get it in the right direction. And then clean up the excess slide grease, if there is any, and put it on the next slide. Here's the second slide, and this cornet is almost done. There's one more thing I want to do though. In the first video I mentioned that this cornet was set up for low pitch, and there's an LP and then a line where you pull the slide out to get it into low pitch. This tuning slide is the main tuning slide to tune the instrument, and the other tuning slide was made for the low pitch. There used to be a rod on here which had some screws on it, and you'd pull it out to where that screw was, and then you would know that you were in low pitch. What I just did is I used my tap and die set to make a little threaded rod. I'm going to install that little threaded rod, and I probably will need the aid of this to get into a small place right there. So I'm going to screw that in. Take that off and straighten it out so that it's parallel. This slide is ready to go in, and I have two little nuts that go on there. Other than they're kind of hard to get in there. And now the cornet is done. I'm not sure how far the slide is supposed to go out, but the player can turn these nuts and move it back and forth and get it into tune. The way to check how loose the valves are is to push it down halfway and then wiggle it back and forth. And this does wiggle a little bit, but for an instrument this age it is not that bad. And because it does wiggle, it means that there probably is a little bit of air leakage in the casing. The air can leak through the ports and then out the bottom or the top of the casing. For an instrument this age, I would say that there's probably minimal air leakage. Let's see, the second valve does wiggle a little too. The first valve is probably the worst, but still not that bad. Several people have said that they want to hear the instrument played when it is finished, and they pay me to fix instruments, not to play them. A good local musician is going to come by and play the instrument, and he will tell me what he thinks about it.
You think it's what, around the early 1900s?
Yeah, early 1900s. And it's a York perfect tone cornet. And
As these LPs, what does that mean?
That's a low pitch.
Low pitch?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then the tuning side here is for low pitch or high pitch.
Huh.
So usually you play it in low pitch.
Okay. I mean, it looks like this is something that you could actually operate with your thumb while you're playing or whatever. So, kind of wonder about that.
You
something
could.
like that
I don't know for sure.
It's possible. Yeah. So we'll give it a whirl.
It's a very interesting instrument. So
you've done a real nice job of refurbishing it, and it looks really great. So you mentioned that this was spray painted gold or something?
Yes, it was spray painted gold, and yes, this gold. Most of the gold spray painting came off. Just a little bit on there. If you look close enough, you can probably find it. But
well, that's good though.
Yeah,
that's good. Well, let's see how it sounds. I'll play a little bit of what did I say? The Carnival of Venice, just maybe the theme or something like that.
Okay.
I do like the sound. I mean, it's just got that that kind of characteristic traditional cornet sound that you'd hear from some of those early recordings.
One thing I was wondering about is when you work on the bell, it hardens it, but then I had to anneal it, which softens it. So this area is probably soft.
Okay.
Or actually probably a combination of soft and hard, which
Yeah.
does change the sound.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what it did to the sound. I mean, of course it did something.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure about that.
So this is something maybe similar, very similar to what Louis Armstrong might have played in his early younger days, right? I mean,
Yeah, he was around that time.
Yeah, right around that time. So it's kind of cool. So maybe I'll play. How about a little Louis Armstrong? Maybe it's from his solo from Cornet Chop Suey.
Okay.
If I remember, it's been about 20 years since I played this, but. Nice. Yeah, I like that. It's got that real classic sound,
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, it's like a great sound. Thanks, guys. Come back for a trumpet lesson sometime.
All right.